Hello, and welcome to I Am Dad podcast with your fatherhood authority, Kenneth Braswell. 30 minutes of wisdom, information, resources, and nugget on your fatherhood journey. Or maybe you're just curious and want to hear some real talk about fatherhood, family, and the minds of men. Well, guess what? We got you too. Sit back, grab your pad and pen, and maybe even bring a little something to sip on. Enjoy 30 straight minutes of fatherhood, family, and fun with the Fatherhood Authority, Kenneth Braswell.
Welcome to another enlightening episode of I Am Dad podcast. Today we have the honor of hosting a truly remarkable guest, John Badalament. John is a proud father of 2 young adults and a renowned speaker, author, educator, coach, consultant, and documentary filmmaker. John is the author of the acclaimed book, The Modern Dad Dilemma: How to Stay Connected with Your Kids in a Rapidly Changing World, and the producer and director of impactful documentaries such as All Men's Are Sons, exploring the legacy of fatherhood, and Gender Traps: How Marriage Problems Start in Kindergarten. Over the last 3 decades, John has been a guiding light in the field of fatherhood, speaking and consulting internationally across schools, governmental agencies, and organizations. As a director of programs at the Fatherhood Project at Massachusetts General Hospital for the past 11 years, John has pioneered groundbreaking programs and studies, including the Dad's Moms in Recovery curriculum and the largely study on fathers' prenatal experiences. John's work has been featured in preeminent media outlets such as ABC News, CBS Sunday Morning, and National Public Radio, and he has been recognized by esteemed organizations for his dedication to ending violence against women and children. His commitment is fostering healthy family dynamics, and his contributions to men's health has earned him invitations to the White House under President Obama and his administration. Today, we're excited to delve into John's vast experience, insights on fatherhood, and his ongoing efforts to support and empower dads everywhere. Please join us, ladies and gentlemen, my man, J-Bad.
What's up? Hey, Brad.
I had to write your bio down because if I tell people how I really know you, it could have went left real quick.
What, in the halls of a fatherhood conference in some hotel in somewhere, America, peddling our books and movies?
Oh my goodness, man! Here's John. Which shirt should I wear? We've been there for a week.
Oh, that's good. Right. Now I just had a flash of a memory of that.
Remember that?
Been there for a week. Oh man. Well, half the bio is funny. When you read the bio, I'm always like, wow, that guy sounds great. That guy sounds really interesting. But half of the bio is like, especially the last part around the White House, was due to you, is due to Fathers Incorporated. Like, I forget what the line was, but it should say was invited by his esteemed colleague and your host, Kenny Braswell. Me, right?
Everything he's accomplished is attributed to me.
Half of them will say. We'll give him a good half. The second half of the bio for sure. What's up?
Man, it's such an honor to have you on. Like I said, man, I literally have been, your name has been on my list. I've reached out. I don't know what, maybe I just was hitting the wrong button or hitting something else and it's not getting to you, but I'm glad to have you on.
Nice.
John, I start these podcasts out with a very specific question. You can answer it any way you want to. I ask the question because it gives people insight into you and why you do what you do. And that question is, tell me your daddy story.
I was ready for it. I did my homework. So my daddy story, yeah, it's funny because I'm trying to think which one, of course, because I feel like I have a few lifetimes of daddy stories, but the central one would be my relationship with my dad, which, well, like most relationships, is, I was going to say was, but is, even though my father's passed on, that relationship in many ways is still alive. And it's both filled with gifts and with some, we'll say, curses, I suppose. That's a little strong word, but but there's a lot of it was complicated, like most father-son relationships. So that's my daddy's story, is that, you know, my dad and mom divorced around basically when I was about 3. So I have very few memories of him in the home, just kind of, you know, flashes of memory. And then more memories of when they were divorced, and I would see my brother and I would see him on the weekends. And this is, I grew up in Michigan for the first 7-8 years, which is why I still have a place in my heart for the Detroit Lions, and the Tigers, actually. So he basically, yeah, we saw him every other weekend until I was about 8, and at that point my mother moved us to Boston, and we really I didn't see him more than once or twice a year max, I would say, really, until for many years, until he passed away, which was 2005. So there was, you know, there was closeness, there was distance, there was a lot of love. My dad, you know, loved me and my brother. And he was also, you know, sort of limited in his capacity to show that love, and was also caught up in all kinds of substances, and he was an addict through and through, in terms of you could take, it was drugs for a while, then it was more alcohol was his main poison, sugar. And he ended up actually dying of complications from diabetes. So it all kind of falls under the heading of self-care, the legacy of self-care and destruction. Both sides of that is one of the legacies that he's passed on to me, which is, you know, how I look at a legacy, like how I deal with that legacy is kind of up to me. It's not on him anymore. It's now mine. And really, I have a 19 and 21-year-old. My kids are 19 and 21. My son Jake's 19, and my daughter Stella's 21. And I see that, you know, I'm now at that stage where I'm seeing the legacy, how that legacy has kind of worked its way through the generations. And I watch them struggle with their, you know, they have their own struggles with self-care and self-love, which is the whole, you know, again, that it's not negative or it can cut both ways. So that's one of the themes of my daddy's story is, you know, the negotiating health, negotiating self-esteem, self-worth, negotiating love and distance. So there's a lot there. So that's one main daddy story, and that's like, you know, a little piece of it.
Oh, small, yeah. We all that's as much as some of us can clip off, right? And so it's kind of like let's clip off a little piece of this. Yeah. We don't want to feed you the whole thing,
right?
You know, you and I, when I first met you, I believe you had just written your book, Mom and Dad's Dilemma. But oftentimes people always ask how I got into this work of fatherhood. And I think people think there's a career track or educational track into it. And it's like, nah, life. That's what brought me into this. What was your journey into this? Like, why and when did you decide that you wanted to do something specifically for dads?
Yeah, it's a great question, because like you, I didn't major, and I majored in English, and that and a quarter will get you maybe a cup of water at Starbucks if you're lucky. Well, it kind of relates to the second part of my daddy story, which is my stepdad. My stepdad came on the scene, you know, somewhere in that transition when I was 4, 5, 6, 7 years old. My mom actually moved to Boston to be with him. He was at law school in Boston, and she basically packed us up and And I guess with my dad's blessing, he fought it, but then he didn't fight it, which I've never really kind of dug too deep into that. He kind of let go, and actually, to his credit, I remember I just had a flash of like me calling him when I was in Boston with my stepdad and my mom, and they got married pretty much right away. I remember calling my dad and being like, I was mad at my stepdad, as I often was, because he kind of laid down the law. And I was like, I want to come live with you. And I just had this flash of memory where my dad was, with it enough to say he was like, yeah, I know you feel like that, but that's not going to work out. And that's as I've thought back on that probably took a lot for him to say. I know it did. And it was like one of those sort of moments of like, oh yeah, all right, there's another nugget of things he did right as a dad. That was the right thing to do, to say to an 8-year-old, no, you're better off. And I think on some level, he gave up the fight to kind of keep us in Michigan, because he knew my mom was going to offer a better life, and he knew my stepdad as well. So that's kind of part 2 of the journey was having a stepdad, and they actually ended up having another child, my younger brother, my little brother, who's 44. So funny. And actually that was my first sort of entree to the journey was my little brother Danny, and I didn't figure this out till not so long ago, like well into my sort of career working with dads and human services, is that I took care of my little brother. He was 11 years younger, so I felt like he was not a threat, in terms of siblings. He was so much younger, and I took to caretaking. And it's funny, we now all the talk these days is about care and getting men involved in caring, and like that word's always been at the forefront of who I am and what I do. I've always I took to changing his diapers. I took to all the things that you think of as care work, as stereotypically mom's work, or so that was really what I took on, a little bit of a brother, but somewhat of a fatherly role, albeit I was 11, 12 years old, and that kind of continued. So that influence of the role and my interest in care work started there. So that's sort of the big sort of the deeper philosophical picture. Practically speaking, I also, I took an interest in counseling and therapy. I was highly recommended that I go to therapy when I was 16 because I got in trouble, and I was lucky enough to have a school administrator, dean or whatever, a guy named Jim Smith, who when I got into trouble, I was having trouble in school, but also getting in trouble. I had a fake ID. I got arrested for having the fake ID. They wanted to make an example of me and charge me with a felony for it. And he was the dean at the school that basically pulled me aside when I got kicked out of class for being, just a knucklehead. And he knew what was going on with me, which is another key factor of in a pretty big high school, 2,000 kids or whatever. This guy took an interest to know who I was, to know what was going on. And he basically was like, hey, seems like things aren't going that well. Would you talk to this guy? And fortunately, my folks had the wherewithal and the resources to get me into therapy, and I just took to it. And that's where I began exploring the dynamics with my father and the, what his impact was on me. And that was the other big influence in terms of, counseling and helping and caring. That was another sort of personal impact. And I would say just career wise, I made a documentary film, which is probably what you saw first before my book. That's how I got into the whole field. Is I made a film about men and their relationship with their dads, called All Men Are Sons: Exploring the Legacy of Fatherhood. I made the film as a way to kind of figure out my story through other stories, and that led to showing it at a conference. And at that conference, it was an education conference. At the conference, schools came up to me and said, "Would you come and talk to our fathers?" And I was like, the light bulb went off in my head. I was like, "Sure, I'll come to your school." And I wasn't even a dad, which made it really pretty crazy, because I would go and there'd be rooms filled with dads, and inevitably the question would come, so how many kids do you have?
Right.
Which I always got defensive. It took me a while to learn not to, bite the hook.
Right.
So that was that officially marked the path onto working with dads.
Yeah, but when you got there, I'm sure that you took some time as you were going through a little bit of self-discovery with respect to yourself, because I think I did a little bit of it as well. Like where does my story fit in this conversation
Right.
of what I'm trying to accomplish? And am I trying to solve my own problem
Right.
in this work, right?
Yep.
Not only my problem that I was going through, but the problem of not having a father in my life, and where was that sitting in my space. Actually had to come to an epiphany to even realize that he was part of why I was where I was, because I'd never given that any thought before. That was never part of my narrative. Like, how does your father impact your ability to succeed or to stay focused or to have goals or to go to college and those things? But when I figured out, I determined at the same time the problem I wanted to solve. Like for you, did you begin to start thinking about in this work that there's a specific problem I want to solve or a thing I want to accomplish?
Yeah, that's interesting way of putting it. And a great question. Yes. And I think, like you, it took me if I heard you right, it took me some time to come to that. I mean, and what I think initially it started as, I've got all these hang-ups and issues with my dad. We have bad communication. I'm angry at him. I know he disappointed me in these ways, and I also know that he did all these things. So it's very like me focused, like my legacy. But when I started talking to other guys and specifically making the film, where I found 5 guys with sort of different stories with their dads, but all what I've now come to see, realize 25 years later, is the theme is intergenerational trauma on some level. And I think the problem I initially was trying to solve, that I realized that it went beyond my story, was that nobody was really guys weren't really talking about it. Like, I knew all these young men in my life that and I had been talking to all these men that had all these very difficult and mostly complicated relationships, a lot of absent fathers, a lot of abuse, a lot of addictions. And I was like, nobody's really talking about this. This is a huge part of becoming a man, let alone becoming a father. And so I think the problem I was initially trying to solve or trying to address in my work was like, why is manhood so limited that we're not able to talk about these elephants in the living room. That was where it started. So it was actually about masculinity and manhood initially, and fathers talking to guys about their fathers was a way into a more, expansive idea of manhood. It was I found it was a pretty easy way in to getting to a more to getting to guys' hearts quicker and more directly. So if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make a whole lot of sense. One of the nuances about you as well that actually intrigued me when I first met you, because I was trying to connect the dots, right? And that was when I found out or learned in some way or manner that you got your master's from Harvard University. Because my small construct in my mind is like, dudes that go to Harvard University go on to own like billion-dollar companies, and they have like high aspirations of like running the country and doing, X, Y, and Z.
Right.
And there was a moment where I thought like, wow, for John, like, how does that fit in your space? Have you ever been able to take that piece of the puzzle and put it in a place in your work that it makes sense? Because in my mind, this is not you, this is my mind. I'm thinking at some point, wow, what does Harvard have to do with all of this stuff?
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
Because it's business, right? It's business, it's corporate, it's blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And
A lot of things.
what was the benefit, or what was the epiphany points that you now look back on from that experience that has served you well in this space? So the question is, again, have you been able to take that Harvard piece of your life, that piece of your puzzle, and put it in the perfect place?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I feel like Harvard means a lot of things to, different things to different people. And that I actually spent part of that year in a course with a incredible woman, Professor Linda C. Powell. And I got to look Linda up. She was one of my mentors and still is, because she's still with me in the work that I do. But her focus is on groups and schools and authority, and looking at race, and looking at class, and looking at difference. She worked in the Philadelphia public schools, but she ran a class that year where that's kind of one of the questions we looked at around authority and all of these areas was, what does it mean to be at Harvard? Like, what does Harvard mean to the different people in the course? And it was a really diverse course in all ways. There were 20 of us. So for me, Harvard, it meant initially it meant privilege. It meant, and frankly, it's been how it's fit into my work is, its value in terms of just what people make up about it has been incredible. I mean, in mostly good ways. Now, I went to the education school, which, for a graduate degree is 1 year, and then they promptly take the pass back. The keys to the kingdom are returned. You do not get to keep them. You can keep one if you pay a lot of money every year and use the gym, but that's about it. It's such a tough question, but basically, I went to the education school, which was filled with, teachers, with educators, higher ed people, early childhood ed. So I went there. I had worked in a school for 2 years out of college, and had pretty well, I burnt on that, and it's hard to believe, but in 2 years. And I went to the ed school as a way of figuring out what I wanted to do within education. So, when people think of Harvard and the one you're kind of referring to, I think oftentimes they mistake Harvard undergrad with the different schools, or the Harvard Business School. So the Harvard Ed School is, like I said, I was there for 1 year. Not to downplay it, it's an incredible place, amazed. The best thing was the faculty that I came in contact with were just amazing, and the fellow students, my colleagues, were amazing. I went to UMass for undergrad, and I barely got in. I got into UMass was my safety school, and that was the only school I got into because mainly because of that year I mentioned where I had trouble in school, and also my scores, my SATs were horrific. So going from UMass to Harvard, the was pretty wild to see the caliber of the students, but that was a pivotal year because I also saw that, like, I think I pretty well got into Harvard. One, I was a guy. They were not many, it was like 8-2, probably 80-20, 80% women, 20% guys. I had 2 years of really pretty extensive school experience. I was with a sort of independent school that was turning around, and so I got to play all these different roles. And to get into Harvard that changed my life, because I had sort of thought of myself as a mediocre student, and I was, and kind of still am. But to be able to get in there and do really well based on what I was interested in was a total game changer. Like, I was undergrad, I was like, I wasn't really that much of I wasn't that interested in too much academically, but going to Harvard, where I was like, it was education. I had just had all this experience that now I wanted to learn about it and apply it. It was like, I could have stayed there. I wish I would have stayed there for longer. So for me, it was validation that I'm intelligent and also I'm intelligent in different ways. I had really, like I said, my SAT still scars me. I'm 55 and I'm still scarred by my SAT scores. They were so low. I had thought of myself, I didn't think of myself as very smart as far as like book smart and grade smart. And once I got in there and it opened me up to there's different ways of being smart. And I actually learned about multiple intelligence theory there. There's music intelligence, emotional intelligence. It did a lot for me to validate my sense of academic or just my sense of self, in that, I was able to feel good about, I was able to sit down and write a book, Yeah. I knew that it was also like, just because I went to Harvard, people made up all these things. I was like, that's not really me. And so that makes sense. So I felt like, on the one hand, I somehow I slipped by and I got in, and I was able to get so much from the experience that, and realize, like, you really can, this idea of what we think of as intelligence is so limited,
Yeah, but Harvard is a deep thought institution, and you're a deep thought guy. Ever since I met you, you've always, as much as you and I laugh and joke, I still glean from the deepness of your thought, how you think about things, how you reason things, how you logic things. I think in another life, if I would have known that institution was a deep thought institution, I probably would have strove to get there, because that's who I am. I'm just deep thought all the time about what I'm doing, very intentional about what I'm trying to do and what I'm trying to accomplish. And so for you enters the Fatherhood Project, at Massachusetts General Hospital. Like, when you began to start looking at the work that they were doing, or looking at the work that you were trying to elevate there, what was that work? Talk to me a little bit about that work.
And thank you. I've always felt like you and I have shared that since beyond or in addition to the laughter and the humor, is we talk about things for these ideas and what we're doing for hours. And I've always, appreciated that about you. As obviously many others have. I guess so the work jump into the Fatherhood Project. Well, so the time when I joined on the Fatherhood Project, which was started by Ray Levy, who's a psychologist at Mass General, he had basically started this idea, more than an idea at the time, but more with like a research bent, and he had secured some funding and kind of put up a website, and like with a bunch of areas like programs that he wanted to do, but in at that stage, very early on, he was still doing, like, had a full practice, so he had managed to get some research going. But when I met him through a good friend of ours, Hajai Shearer, who is now the assistant deputy for the state of Massachusetts in early childhood education. Hajai Shearer's, one of our close friends, and endlessly, I mean, like, everywhere I go, that man's name he's like the ultimate he's a network to himself. Like the first, when I got to Boston and started working in the field, they were like, oh, you have to talk to Hajai Shearer. That was in like 2002. Anyway, it's no surprise, Hajai was the one who introduced me to Ray at the Fatherhood Project. And he said, hey, I met this guy, you two should talk. And I talked to Ray and basically went on the website, and it was like, oh, these ideas, these programs, and I clicked through, and it was pretty clear that, like, they hadn't been built yet, basically. And again, this is early stage. So I just said to Ray, I was like, basically, I like your ideas a lot, and I think I can make those real on the ground. Because at that point, I was getting pretty good at, I've always been interested in practice, in like, can these ideas that we talk about, that we read about, like, how do we put those into practice on the ground? And so Ray was like, we just kind of hit it off right there. And he said, that sounds good to me. Let's meet. And it took us about a year to craft a position within within Mass General, which is a massive, healthcare system with, like, I don't know, 70,000 employees or something. So it took us a while to shape what became the director of programs at Mass General at the Fatherhood Project. And one of the things that caught my eye, I recall, was he had a section on schools. And I was like, oh, that's interesting, because this is like probably May of 2012, maybe 2013. And at that point, there was very little in terms of fatherhood in the schools. And that's what I had been doing for the last, 10 years. Like I mentioned, my film, I started working schools as an educator. And so fatherhood schools became the place where I zeroed in on sort of fatherhood work. And so when I saw Ray at that part of the Fatherhood Project, I thought, this could be really something.
Yeah, but you guys have also, you found a way to kind of do the fatherhood work and marry it with work with women and moms as well. But there's some very unique spaces too, which is, forethinking, right? Like 20 years ago, when I started this fatherhood work, and, maybe 15 or so, when I met you, when I was working for the state of New York,
Right.
like, nobody was talking about fatherhood and mental health. Nobody was
No.
talking about fatherhood and addiction. Nobody was talking about fatherhood and prenatal intervention. And nobody was talking. So even then, I remember you talking about those things,
Yeah.
and, questioning, like, where does that fit in this work that we're trying to get dudes to be able to pay their child support, right? Very small thinking when it comes to parenting for fathers.
Yep.
Like, now that you're some umpteen years, into this work, talk to me a little bit about what that looks like now when you're working with particularly dads, but moms also, in this space of mental health and addiction.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I mean, I recall, and again, that's what we've shared, I think, over the years, is being able to come together and see, like, you were way out ahead of fatherhood as it relate. What was it called? The Code Blue something.
Code blue, yeah.
Code Blue, like
Mental health, code blue.
mental health, and I think that's one of the things I've loved. Just to, I'll answer your question, but about your work is like, where's Kenny headed? Like, what is he doing? And you wrote your first book, and it was, kind of had, to me, was about marriage, and divorce and navigating co-parenting. Like, again, way before these were entire areas of study, which they are now,
Right.
or so that's been pretty wild. But back to, preceding the Fatherhood Project, like I said, I was in schools. The only, in the early 2000s, the only, I want to say maybe Watchdogs was there, but maybe not quite yet. All Pro Dads somewhere. There was very little in terms of fatherhood in general. Was not really. It was on the map for sure, National Fatherhood Initiative, but like addressing dads specifically around parenting in schools, not very common. And it's still, which, I'm sure we could spend time talking about this. There's still areas where I'm shocked that it's not being addressed, schools and education being one. But I would say when I got to the Fatherhood Project, that was 2012, 2013. I had already done I felt like a substantial amount of work and time trying to really get the school thing going and get dads more, just more acknowledged and as a place to get dads together and involved in kids' lives. So when I met Ray at the Fatherhood Project, I was like, healthcare, like, here's an opportunity, like, talk about a no-brainer, like new dads, like, where do dads go to get, I just saw it as this huge opportunity to address this subject that was so near to my heart and was the essence of my work. Like, what better area than healthcare? And this is, again, 2012, at one of the best hospital systems arguably in the world. And like, still, even then, and even today, it's still further behind, I think, than like human services, than, the healthcare system in general. Dads weren't even really on the map there, and there's still a struggle today to get them acknowledged. So what we did at the Fatherhood Project was just kind of what I thought was pretty intuitive. Like, all right, where are the dads? Like, obstetrics. We started looking at new dads, and how can we? My work's always been like, where are the guys, and how do we get to them, and how do we educate and sort of learn from them? That's my overall mission. So we started working in pediatrics, and kind of following the lead of what was already there, there were a lot of like services for moms, like WIC, and there were breastfeeding services, there were nutrition programs, all these different service playgroups for moms, and that's where we started. We had the buy-in from the director of Revere, MGH Revere, which is a community hospital. And we started right there and saying, all right, where are the dads? Like, do they come to the visits? Are they even aware they should be coming to the visits? Are they invited? We did looking at the environment of pediatrics. What's on the walls? What are the messages we're sending? So we started in those places, which was back then and still kind of is pretty progressive in terms of like hospital. You wouldn't think so, but we did a study in obstetrics about just guys' experience going into the well child visits. we had over almost 1,000 guys respond to our survey, and over a period of 4 weeks. It was an unbelievable amount of the response that we got, and what information we learned was like, guys want information. They want to be more helpful to their partners, and how can we get it to them? And so I don't know. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but it was within the healthcare sort of context that we began developing programs that seemed intuitive to me, but I guess we're pretty progressive at the time. And the addictions field, that's a whole area in itself, that we started working with dads that were in recovery houses and halfway houses, different organizations, and moms. And that program we've really been building, called Parents in Recovery, and we're still doing a lot of curriculum design and training organizations how to engage parents in recovery.
Well, this co-parenting thing is something that is also evolving, right, in this work, because I think for those of us who have been 10 toes down in the fatherhood space, for me here in Metro Atlanta, running our Gentle Warriors Academy and working, directly with these dads, which I thought I would never get back into. I left direct service behind, said I wasn't doing that anymore. Really wanted to have my hand in having a systemic impact. And then I find myself here back in direct service again. But now I understand why I needed to be here, because I really needed to have one foot close to the ground, while the other foot was, in the air with policy, legislation, and those kinds of things. But one of the things that we're learning with these dads is it's critically important to begin to start thinking about the bridge between the work that we're doing with fathers and the necessary work that has to be done with moms. One of the statistics that I always kind of speak about when it comes to non-married parents is the fact that 85% of them are still romantically engaged at the birth of their child.
Right.
The thing I love about the hospital work, and I would love to hear about what you're seeing at that space, is I think that the hospital is the best and the first opportunity point to strengthen relationships absent marriage.
Got it.
Are you seeing some of that are you capturing them that point?
Yeah. I mean, I look at it like there are, windows of golden opportunity in a man's life, and the perinatal or prenatal or birth time, time of birth is like the number one space and time in which to engage dads, again, whether they're married or not, and to strengthen the relationship with the child's mom. And we saw that again. I'll mention our study, which has not, I don't think, gotten out there enough. It's in a journal, and there's a couple chapters in a book. But what we found was, guys. Well, one of the biggest findings was guys wanted to know what they could do specifically to help the mom. They wanted information about what can they do, which makes sense if you go with sort of the general stereotypical sort of male thing of wanting to be helpful. I don't think that's necessarily just that men want that, but there's a sense of, at the time, having when a baby comes along, that guys don't feel that useful. So naturally they want to feel useful. They want information. And, the research has shown that it's actually really helpful for the mom to have a guy that's invested. The babies have better outcomes, and men actually have better outcomes. It's also, we discovered that period is a great place and a great way to get men screened for mental health issues, for addictions, for health issues. That's something we're still working on, which is trying to get one of the prenatal visits to be a family visit, but a visit where it's explicitly for the man in the relationship to come in, because we found that there were high, the rates of depression. We did a couple of different scales, were high. It's a great place, and if you think about it, makes sense for the dad to also get his health looked at. So I can't say enough about how important that. I look at it like it's a trajectory point. Right there is the point at which, if the dad feels useful and not view the baby as something coming in between him and the mom, or if he feels like kind of left out by default because all the attention's on her, like, those sound like silly things, but they're very real dynamics that feel really bad if you're not, feeling a part of it. And it's often not like in many cases, the mom's not doing it purposely. That's how the system's set up. So that is a point at which that trajectory for all relationships can be changed and make huge changes over time. That makes sense.
So why aren't more people doing it, working with hospitals? Was it hard for you to do that? Was it difficult to get into the system itself, or was it both difficult to get in and to convince them the relevance of what you were trying to accomplish?
Great. I mean, that's a great question. It's the answer in my experience was kind of all the above, but it was. It felt very political. Now, I wasn't exactly, we were within the hospital system, but, we weren't within obstetrics. We were a program within, we're actually in the Department of Psychology. So the answer is, why aren't more people doing it? Because there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of political issues, which makes sense, but they don't make sense to the point where we shouldn't look at it. But there was a feeling of like the zero sum. If we focus on guys, we're gonna, it's gonna cost. You look at all the gains that women have made in terms and have fought for. I shouldn't say made, like fought for, to get their health and prenatal health and perinatal health to the place it is today. And we still have problems. That's not to say it's perfect, but there's a real fear that those things are going to be overshadowed, or that funding is going to be directed away from them. So those are important issues that I feel like need to get hashed out. And we were doing that at the obstetrics, at the department level. And, it's complicated, but it's doable, because we look in like England, Australia, some of those countries have done a tremendous job of figuring out that it's not a zero sum, and that it's actually in everyone's interest to get dads in early, like I said, for screening purposes, for the health of the baby, for the health of the mom. There's no arguing the case that, but getting the funding and getting, the political will to say that guys matter here too is no small task. And I think those fears that women have are real, and they're legitimate, that they don't want their gains to be rolled back. So, but that doesn't mean they can't be overcome. I mean, does that make sense? I mean, it's.
Yeah, no, it does. It was, it's kind of like when, so a couple of things. One is this zero sum game just drives me absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
Because I think even when we have that conversation, we take our eye off of the mark.
Right.
That you and I, although we're working with fathers, we're in this work because we care about child well-being. That's why we're in this work. It's not because we have an overzealous heart for fathers.
Right.
It's because you and I believe that if we strengthen fathers and families, children fare better, and so do moms. Research bears that out. And so that fear on the back end for somehow we're coming in to take away from moms drives me crazy, and I don't even understand where the thought comes from.
Well, I think the at a systemic level, you're talking about, uh, I guess it comes down to funding for women's health, funding for, to make sure that women have all these visits, and that their health is prioritized. And the problem to me is that we now face, and I think the reality is in our face, that if we care about kids, like you just said, that's why we do this work. That's why I do this work. I know that's why you do it. It's not, look, I'm a guy and I have a lot of, issues with guys, including myself, and like masculinity. Like you and I both know there's some, real knuckleheads out there that make life a lot harder for everyone. And
Right.
and I don't, so that's a whole thing in itself. But if we care about kids, there's no, and you've seen this too, like there's no more question about like, should we involve the dad? Like, should we, like the simplest way to put it is that kid is, and we should have known this years ago, but now we have science to back it up. It's not a question, should we? That kid is going to be impacted by that father, whether he's in the picture, whether he says he's in the picture, but he's not, or whether he's not in the picture. Like any way you slice it, that kid is going to be impacted. So would you rather have would you rather know what's going on or just bury your head in the sand? It's indisputable now. Kids are impacted any way you cut it. So that to me should be impetus for, what I found maddening at the hospital level was that you could not turn a corner without seeing something about family-centered care. And I'm like, how is this family-centered care if the father is not mentioned in any of the literature? A parent, they still use parent, like it's upsetting. And I think it's changing. There are people working on this and at the policy level. And I'm thinking of one, now his name's escaping me, that's been doing some amazing work. But anyway, it does beg the question, why isn't more of this happening?
Yeah, part of me wants to do this work. I'm actually working on 2 books at the same time.
No.
There is a third one. Yeah. I'm actually writing my memoir. I'm writing my second half to When the Tear Won't Fall, but it's going to be a memoir. Okay. A memoir, because I want to tell it from my experience, not from facts and figures. I want to kind of talk about like what I was thinking, what I felt, what the environment was, those kinds of things, as opposed to the dates and figures and peoples and names and those things. I want to kind of talk about how I've fared in these past 20 years now, and to this conversation that you and I are having, we're banging our heads up against the wall. We know the practical application of what it is we're trying to do, yet we're running into something out there that we really can't put our fingers on or put a name on it, right? And that is what I want to talk about, those things that are in the space that has not allowed us to do that. The second one is on something else that men don't talk a lot about, and that is aging. Like what happens, like the name of my book is a working title, but right now is How I Found Out I Don't Give a F Anymore. And basically the book is about self-discovery. It is about how I care less about how people see me and how I care less about how people think what I say. And so I'm right now doing something very interesting, which I'll probably call you at some point. I've decided that I'm going to start interviewing some people because I want to get some different perspectives. And that is, when is the first occurrence in your life that you remembered that you cared about how someone else saw you?
Oh boy. Yeah.
like I'm going back, I'm digging in my mental to kind of figure out when was the first time that I actually cared about how someone saw me. And I had one, and then I was talking to somebody the other day, and now I have at least the first one I can remember going back. And the first occurrence that I can remember to which I cared about how people saw me was when my mother sent me to the store to buy something with food stamps.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And I cared about if my friends saw me.
Right.
And
Right.
I cared about what people thought
Right.
about me.
Yep.
Because the mere transaction of using a food stamp to buy food
Right.
said to people I was poor.
Right.
And I didn't really have an understanding of what poor meant
Right.
until that.
But you knew it was not good, or
Right.
yeah. Right.
Right. So I'm trying to tell, I want to tell that now. So now I'm digging back to see if I remember anything before then, but then I want to walk through all of this work that
Right.
we're talking about and all of these things that we're talking about to begin to start talking about, you know, when we become aware and when we become conscious about how people see us, what we think, and how people respond to who we are. And my theory is that the older you get, the less you care.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a deep question. I mean, of course, got my mind turning, because for me it was, I can't remember when I didn't care what people thought, because my dad, and specifically around the times being with my dad, was so sort of over the top, and mostly it was anger, but not always anger, but in public places. So we would get, the classic would be servers, in a restaurant. It was always, a lot of it was in restaurants, or he would yell things out at a baseball game, which drew, or he would get in a fight with somebody, and it drew attention to us. So all I remember was wanting to disappear and wanting to be small and not wanting to be associated with this man, but yet I was so little that that was who I depended on. That was my
Wow.
yeah. So it goes to the point where it's like self-consciousness, I guess, is what part of what you're talking about. But I remember, and I remember more powerfully, like, yeah, when did I ever not worry about what other people thought?
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, it's a really good question. And I don't know
Yeah.
that's changed. For me, and again, it's probably going to be different for different people based on their stories. That's been a battle of mine, which is tied to self-esteem, which is, my go-to is like shame, and I'm wrong. Whereas I think some people's go-to is like, I don't care, and what they think doesn't matter to me at all. Like some
Right.
sort of self-esteem to me is in the middle.
Right. Yeah, but it's almost, just to tie this conversation
Yeah.
up in a bow, it's almost like when you have dads come into your program and you say to them, I can say something as simple as, hey, tell me your daddy's story.
Yeah.
And their response could be, man, I don't give a F about that dirt, blah, 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 blah. He don't mean nothing to me.
Right.
And it's like, well, no, yes, he does. Your response says to me that it means something to you.
Right.
You just haven't defined what it means, but it clearly means something to you, because if he didn't, you would not have that response
Right. Right.
in that way and in that manner. And so I think even in this conversation, when it comes to guys like myself, who did not grow up and didn't meet mine until I was 23 years old,
Yeah.
somewhat kind of beginning to figure out when did not having a father in my life become an issue for me publicly.
Yeah. Right.
Right. And sometimes that response is so that you can get people to feel the way you feel, so that you don't feel so bad about the way you really feel.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. It does.
So listen, tell people how to get in touch with you, how to get your book. And you said some time ago you was going to do a second anniversary to your documentary. Whatever happened with that?
So that's happening. Actually, that's in the last. I think I wrote that last night when I was redoing my bio for today. The last line, I believe, was that we have begun filming the follow-up, which is All Men Are Sons, The Legacy 25 years later. And so it's begun production, kind of pre-production, but we've actually started shooting with Will Power, one of the guys in the film. So you can reach me at, I'm at the fatherhoodproject.org. That's one of the websites, or on LinkedIn, John Badalament, Badalament. But that's, we started filming, and the goal for the filming is to get the 5 guys back together with Terry Real, who was the he's a therapist, but we in the first film, we got all the guys together. They didn't know each other, and we met for a day with Terry Real. That was sort of the crux. That was the glue of the film. And then we show the individual stories, but we're in the process of trying to make that group happen again, which is no small feat. 25 years later, get everyone scattered all over the country. Terry actually there's a documentary about him coming out on Netflix. I haven't seen a date yet, but we're sort of waiting for that to pass as well, because the filmmakers don't want him in other projects until that goes. But we have plenty. Yeah, right. So, but we have plenty to film in the meantime. So far, we went back and saw Will, and he has his 2 sons. So the film covers a lot of ground. 25 years since we met these guys.
Wow, nice. Looking forward to seeing that. Let me know how I can help you move that forward. Thank you, sir, my friend. Let's continue to build together. Continue to do this work. There's a lot of work out there to be done. And, we're the guys to do it, right? If not us, who?
Us who? Yeah, and keep going, man. I appreciate all you provide inspiration all the time for me. So, and many others, I'm sure. So I look forward to the next time I got to ask you what shirt to wear.
And to all my I Am Dad podcast listeners, listen, you know how I like to leave you. Always be kind to others as you're kind to yourself, or you might find yourself by yourself. Always shoot high for your goals, because even if you miss, you'll be amongst the stars. And as my good friend and mentor Art Mitchell always said to me, it's nice to be important, but you know what? It's much more important to be nice. Until next Sunday, God bless and peace out.
Thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us. You've been listening to I Am Dad Podcast. We hope that you have been informed, encouraged you to think, or even inspired your heart for the love of dads. The conversation does not end here. Come back and join us next week. Same time, same place. Or you can continue the dialogue on our I Am Dad Facebook page. We also invite you to listen to past episodes, learn more about us, and keep up with special activities by visiting IamDadPodcast.com. That's IamDadPodcast.com. Until next time, I leave you with this reminder of manhood from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 11. When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. Because of this reminder, I will always understand that I am Dad, period.